I felt every bone in my body turn to jelly. That thing about the asylum. When we'd stopped and picked up the hitchhiker, I hadn't really believed he was a madman who just escaped. Often you get scared by things, but you can still tell yourself it's just your imagination, that you're being stupid. After all, there are lots of stories about escaped lunatics, and none of them are ever true. But now I wasn't so sure. Had I imagined it? Had he said something else? "You're dead." I thought back, picturing the movement of his lips. He'd said it all right. We were doing about 40 miles per hour, punching through the rain. I turned away, trying to ignore the man on the seat beside me. Mr. Relic. There was something strange about that name, and without really thinking, I found myself writing it on the window using the tip of my finger. R-E-L-L-I-K, Relic. The letters formed out of the condensation inside the car, hung there for a moment. Then the two eyes in the middle began to run. It reminded me of blood. The name sounded Hungarian or something. It made me think of someone in Dracula. "Where do you want us to drop you off?" my mother asked. "Anywhere," Mr. Relic said. "Where do you live in Ipswich?" There was a pause. "Blade Street," he said. "Blade Street? I don't think I know it. It's near the centre." My mother knew every street in Ipswich. She lived there for 10 years before she married my father. But she'd never heard of Blade Street, and why the hitchhiker paused before he answered her question. Had he been making it up? The thunder rolled over us a second time. "I'm going to kill you," Relic said. But he said it so quietly that I heard, and this time I knew for certain. He was mad. He'd escaped from Fairfields. We picked him up in the middle of nowhere and he was going to kill us all. I leant forward trying to catch my parents' eyes, and that was when I happened to look in the driver's mirror. That was then when I saw the word I'd written on the window just a few moments before. R-E-L-L-I-K, Relic. But reflected in the mirror, it said something else. K-I-L-L-E-R. Killer. What was I supposed to do? What would you do if you were in my situation? We were still doing 40 miles an hour in the rain, following a long empty road with fields on one side, trees on the other, and thick darkness everywhere. We were trapped inside the car with a man who could have a knife on him or even a gun or something worse. My parents didn't know anything, but for some reason the man had made himself known to me. So what were my choices? I could scream. He would lash out and stop me before I had even opened my mouth. I can imagine those long fingers closing on my throat. He would strangle me in the back seat, and my parents would drive on without even knowing what had happened until it was their turn. I could trick him. I could say I was feeling car sick. I could make them stop the car, and then, when we got out, I could somehow persuade my parents to run for it. But that was a bad idea. We were safer while we were still moving. At least Mr. Relic, or whatever his real name was, couldn't attack my father while he was driving. The car would go out of control. He couldn't reach my mother either. That would mean lunging diagonally across the car and somehow getting over the back of her seat. No, I was the only one in danger right now. But that would change the moment we stopped. Could I talk to him, reason with him, hope against hope that I'd imagined it all and he didn't mean us any harm? And then I remembered. I was sitting behind my mother for a reason. When we set out that morning, my father had told me to sit there because there was something wrong with the door on the other side. It was an old car, a Volkswagen estate, and the catch on one of the passenger doors had broken. My mother said it was dangerous and had told me to sit on the left-hand side to be sure that I wore my seatbelt. I was wearing it now, but Mr. Relic wasn't. I shifted around in my seat as if trying to get more comfortable. Mr. Relic was instantly alert. I could see that if I was going to try something, I would have to move fast. He told me who he was. He knew that I knew. He was almost expecting me to try something. "Well, I'll drop you off for the next roundabout," my father said. "That'll be fine." But the hitchhiker had no intention of getting out at the next roundabout. His face darkened. The eye with the scar twitched as I watched. His hand slid into his jacket and curled round something underneath the material. I didn't have to see to know what it was. A knife. A moment later his hand reappeared and I caught the glint of silver. I knew exactly what was going to happen. He would attack me. My father would stop the car. What else could he do? Then it would be his turn, and then my mother's. I yelled out, and then everything happened in a blur.